Okay. Excuse me. Chapter 35, Discovery. In order to fully understand the exclamation made by my uncle and his allusions to these illustrious and learned men, it was necessary to enter into certain explanations in regard to a circumstance of the highest importance to paleontology, or the science of fossil life, which had taken place a short time before our departure from the upper regions of the earth. I'm sorry, y'all hold on just 1 second. I'm going to turn the dishwasher off. It's making a lot of racket here. Probably going to be distract. It's going to distract me. I don't know about y'all, but I'll be right back.
I'm here. How's it going? So we're on chapter 35. I'm trying to see. Oh, here he comes. Alrighty.
Okay, sorry about that. Having all kinds of excitement. Discovery upon discovery. On the 28th of March, 1863, some navigators under the direction of M. Boucher de Perthes were at work in a great quarries of Moulin Quignon near Abbeville, in the department of Somme, in France. While at work, they unexpectedly came upon a human jawbone buried 14 feet below the surface of the soil. It was the first fossil of the kind that had ever been brought to the light of day. Near this unexpected human relic were found some hatchets and carved flints, covered and clothed by time in one uniform, brilliant tint of verdigris. Sure, why not? The report of this extraordinary and unexpected discovery spread not only all over France, but over England and Germany. Many learned men belonged to various scientific bodies, and noteworthy among others, Messrs. Milne Edwards and de Quatrefages took the affair very much to heart, demonstrated the incontestable authenticity of the bone in question, and became, to use the phrase then recognized in England, the most ardent supporters of the jawbone question. To the eminent geologists of the United Kingdom, who looked upon the fact as certain, Messrs. Falconer, Buck, Carpenter, and others were soon united to the learned men of Germany, and among those in the first rank, the most eager, the most enthusiastic, was my uncle, Professor Hardwigg. The authenticity of a human fossil of the Quaternary period seemed then to be incontestably demonstrated, and even to be admitted by the most skeptical. This system or theory, call it what you will, had, it is true, a bitter adversary, a M. Elie de Beaumont. This learned man, who holds such a high place in the scientific world, holds that the soil of Moulin Quignon does not belong to the diluvium, but to a much less ancient stratum, and in accordance with Cuvier in this respect, he would by no means admit that the human species was contemporary with the animals of the Quaternary epoch. My worthy uncle, Professor Hardwigg, in concert with the great majority of geologists, had held firm, had disputed, discussed, and finally, after considerable talking and writing, M. Elie de Beaumont had been pretty well left alone in his opinions. We were familiar with all the details of this discussion, but were far from being aware then that since our departure the matter had entered upon a new phase. Other similar jawbones, though belonging to individuals of varied types and very different natures, had been found in the movable gray sands of certain grottos in France, Switzerland, and Belgium, together with arms, utensils, tools, bones of children, of men in the prime of life, and old men. The existence of men in the Quaternary period became, therefore, more positive every day. But this was far from being all. New remains dug up from the Pliocene or Tertiary deposits had enabled the more far-seeing or audacious among learned men to assign even a far greater degree of antiquity to the human race. These remains, it is true, were not those of men. That is, were not the bones of men, but objects decidedly having served the human race. Shin bones, thigh bones of fossil animals, regularly scooped out, and in fact sculptured, bearing the unmistakable signs of human handiwork. By means of these wondrous and unexpected discoveries, man ascended endless centuries in the scale of time. He, in fact, preceded the mastodon, became the contemporary of Elephas meridionalis, the southern elephant, acquired an antiquity of over 100,000 years, since that is the date given by the most eminent geologists to the Pliocene period of the Earth. Such was the state of paleontologic science, and what we moreover knew sufficed to explain our attitude before this great cemetery of the plains of the Hardwigg Ocean. It will now be easy to understand the professor's mingled astonishment and joy when, on advancing about 20 yards, he found himself in the presence of, I may say, face to face with, a specimen of the human race actually belonging to the Quaternary period. It was indeed a human skull, perfectly recognizable, had a soil of very peculiar nature, like that of the cemetery of Saint Michel at Bordeaux, preserved it during countless ages? This was the question I asked myself, but which I was wholly unable to answer. But this head which stretched, and parchmentary skin, with the teeth whole, the hair abundant, was before our eyes as in life. I stood muted, almost paralyzed with wonder and awe before this dread apparition of another age. My uncle, who on almost every occasion was a great talker, remained for a time completely dumbfounded. He was too full of emotion for speech to be possible. After a while, however, we raised up to the body to which the skull belonged. We stood it on end. It seemed to our excited imaginations to look at us with its terrible hollow eyes. After some minutes of silence, the man was vanquished by the professor. Human instinct succumbed to scientific pride and exultation. Professor Hardwigg, carried away by his enthusiasm, forgot all circumstances of our journey, the extraordinary position in which we were placed, the immense cavern which stretched far away over our heads. There can be no doubt that he thought himself at the institution addressing his attentive pupils, for he put on his most doctoral style, waved his hand, and began, Gentlemen, I have the honor on this auspicious occasion to present to you a man of the quaternary period of our globe. Many learned men have denied its very existence, while other able persons, perhaps even higher authority, have affirmed their belief in the reality of his life. If the St. Thomases of paleontology were present, they would reverentially touch him with their fingers and believe in his existence. Thus acknowledging their obstinate heresy, I know that science should be careful in relation to all discoveries of this nature. I am not without having heard the many Barnums and other quacks who have made a trade of such like pretended discoveries. I have, of course, heard of the discovery of knee bones of Ajax, of pretended findings of the body of Orestes by the Artiates, and of the body Asteriscus, 10 span 15 feet, of which we read in Pausanias. I have read everything in relation to the skeleton of Trapani, discovered in the 14th century, and which many persons close chose to regard as that of Polyphemus, and the history of the giant dug up during the 16th century in the environs of Palmyra. You're well aware, I am, gentlemen, of the existence of the celebrated analysis made near Lucerne in 1577, of the great bones which the celebrated Dr. Felix Platter declared belonging to a giant about 19 feet high. I have devoured all the treatises of Cassanian and all those memoirs, pamphlets, speeches, and replies published in reference to the skeletons of Teutobochus, king of the Cimbri, the invader of Gaul, dug out of a gravel pit in Dauphine in 1613. In the 8th century, I should have denied with Peter Campet the existence of the Predamites of Schuxer. I have had in my hands the writing called Gigans. Here my uncle was afflicted by the natural infirmity which prevented him from pronouncing difficult words in public. I can relate. It was not exactly stuttering, but a strange sort of constitutional hesitation. The writing named Gigans, he repeated. He, however, could get no further. Giganteo. Impossible. The unfortunate word would not come out. There would have been great laughter at the institution had that mistake happened there. Gigantosteology, at last exclaimed Professor Hardwigg between two savage growls. Having got over our difficulty and getting more and more excited. Yes, gentlemen, I am well acquainted with all these matters, and know also that Cuvier and Blumenbach fully recognize in these bones the undeniable remains of mammoths of the Quaternary period. But after what we now see, to allow a doubt is to insult scientific inquiry. There is the body. You can see it. You can touch it. It is not a skeleton. It is a complete and uninjured body, preserved with an anthropological object. I did not attempt to controvert this singular and astounding assertion. If I could but wash this corpse in a solution of sulfuric acid, continued my uncle, I would undertake to remove all the earthly particles, and these resplendent shells which are encrusted all over this body. But I am without this precious dissolving medium. Nevertheless, such as it is, this body will tell its own history. Here the professor held up the fossil body and exhibited with rare dexterity. No professional showman could have shown more activity. As on examination you will see, my uncle continued, it is only about 6 feet in length, which is a long way from the pretended giants of early days. As to the particular race of which it belonged, it is incontestably Caucasian. It is of the white race, that is of our own, the skull of this fossil being as a perfect ovid, without any remarkable or prominent development of the cheekbones, and without any projection of the jaw. It presents no indication of the prognathism which modifies the facial angle. Measure the angle for yourselves, and you will find that it is just 90 degrees. But I will advance still farther on the road of inquiry and deduction, and I will dare venture to say that this human sample or specimen belongs to the Japhetic family, which spread over the world from India to the uttermost limits of Western Europe. There is no occasion, gentlemen, to smile at my remarks. The facial angle is formed by two planes. One, more or less vertical, is in straight line with the forehead and the incisors. The other, horizontal, which passes through the organs of hearing and lower nasal bone. Prognathism is the anthropological language, means that particular projection of the jaw which modifies the facial angle. Of course, nobody smiled. But the excellent professor was so accustomed to beaming countenances at his lectures that he believed he saw all his audience laughing during the delivery of his learned dissertation. Yes, he continued with renewed animation, this is a fossil man, a contemporary of the mastodons, with the bones of which this whole amphitheater is covered. But if I am called on to explain how he came to this place, how these various strata by which he is covered to have fallen in this vast city, I can undertake to give you no explanation. Doubtless, if we carry ourselves back to the Quaternary epoch, we shall find that great and mighty convulsions took place in the crust of the earth. The, con- the continually cooling operation through which the earth had to pass produced fissures, landslides, and chasms through which a large portion of the earth made its way. I come to no absolute conclusion, but there is the man, surrounded by the works of his hand, his hatchets, his carved flints, which belong to the stony period, and the only relational supposition is that, like myself, he visited the center of the earth as a traveling tourist, a pioneer of science. At all events, there can be no doubt of his great age and of his being one of the oldest race of human beings. The professor, with these words, ceased his oration, and I burst forth into loud and unanimous applause. Yay! Besides, after all, my uncle was right. Much more learned men than his nephew would have found it rather hard to refute his facts and arguments. Another circumstance soon presented itself. This fossilized body was not the only one in this vast plain of bones. The cemetery of an extinct world. Other bodies were found. As we trod the dusty plain, and my uncle was able to choose the most marvelous of these specimens in order to convince the most incredulous. In truth, it was a surprising spectacle. The successive remains of generations and generations of men and animals confounded together in one vast cemetery. But a great question now presented itself to our notice, and one we were actually afraid to contemplate in all its bearings. Had these once animated beings been buried so far beneath the soil by some tremendous convulsion of nature after they had been earth to earth and ashes to ashes, or had they lived here below in this subterranean world under the fascists? I don't know how to say that word. I read it before. I still don't know it. I should look it up. Sky. Yeah, sure. Factitious. Why not? That's what Jonathan says. If it's wrong, it's his fault. Factitious. That sounds good. Factitious sky. Born, married, and given in marriage, and died at last, just like ordinary inhabitants of the earth. Up to the present moment, marine monsters, fish, and such like animals had alone been seen alive. The question which rendered us rather uneasy was a pertinent one. Were any of these men of the abyss wandering about the deserted shores of this wondrous sea of the center of the earth? This was a question which rendered me very uneasy and uncomfortable. How should they really be in existence? Would they receive us men from above? Chapter 36. What is it? For a long and weary hour, we tramped over this great bed of stones. We advanced regardless of everything, drawn on by ardent curiosity. What other marvels did this great cavern contain? What other wondrous treasures for the scientific man? My eyes were quite prepared for any number of surprises. My imagination lived in expectation of something new and wonderful. The borders of the great Central Ocean had for some time disappeared behind the hills of that were scattered over the grounds occupied by the plains of bones. The imprudent and enthusiastic professor, who did not care whether he lost himself or not, hurried me forward. We advanced silently, bathed in waves of electric fluid. By reason of a phenomenon which I cannot explain, and thanks to its extreme diffusion, now complete, the light illuminated equally the sides of every hill and rock. Its seat appeared to be nowhere, and produced no shade whatever. The appearance presented was that of a tropical country at midday in summer. In the midst of equatorial regions and under vertical rays of the sun. All signs of vapor had disappeared. The rocks, the distant mountains, had some confused masses of far-off forest, assumed a weird and mysterious aspect under this equal distribution of the luminous fluid. We resembled to a certain extent the mysterious personage in one of Hoffman's fantastic tales, the man who lost his shadow. After we had walked about a mile farther, we came to the edge of a vast forest, not, however, one of the vast mushroom forests we had discovered near Port Gretchen. It was the glorious and wild vegetation of the Tertiary period, in all its superb magnificence. Huge palms of a species now unknown, superb palmacites, a genus of fossil palms from the coal formation, pines, yews, cypress, and conifers, or cone-bearing trees. The whole bound together by an inextricable and complicated mass of creeping plants. A beautiful carpet of mosses and ferns grew beneath the trees. Pleasant brooks murmured beneath umbrageous boughs, little worthy of this name, for no shade did that give. Upon their borders small tree-like shrubs, such as are seen in the hot countries on our own inhabited globe. The one thing wanting in these plants, these shrubs, these trees, was color. Forever deprived of the vivifying warmth of the sun, they were vapid and colorless. All shade was lost in one uniform tint of a brown and faded character. The leaves were wholly devoid of verdure, and the flowers, so numerous during the Tertiary period which gave them birth, were without color and without perfume. Something like paper discolored by long exposure to the atmosphere. My uncle ventured beneath the gigantic groves. I followed him through, though now not without a certain amount of apprehension. Since nature had shown herself capable of producing such stupendous vegetable supplies, why might we not meet mammals just as large and therefore dangerous? I particularly remarked in the clearings left by trees that had fallen and been partially consumed by time many legumes, bean-like shrubs, and such as the maple and other eatable trees, dear to ruminating animals. Then there appeared confounded together and intermixed the trees of such varied lands, specimens of the vegetation of every part of the globe. There was the oak near the palm tree, the Australian eucalyptus, an interesting class of the order Myrtaceae, leaning against the tall Norwegian pine, the poplar of the north, mixing its branches with those of the New Zealand kaurus. It was enough to drive the most ingenious classifier of the upper regions out of his mind, and to upset all his received ideas about botany. Suddenly I stopped short and restrained my uncle. The extreme diffuseness of the light enabled me to see the smallest object in the distant copses. I thought I saw, no, I really did see with my own eyes immense, gigantic animals moving about under the mighty trees. Yes, they were truly gigantic animals, a whole herd of mastodons, not fossils, but living and exact like those discovered in 1801 on the marshy banks of the great Ohio in North America. Yes, I could see these enormous elephants, whose trunks were tearing down large boughs, and working in and out the trees like legions of serpents. I could hear the sounds of the mighty tusks uprooting huge trees. The boughs crackled, and the whole masses of leaves and green branches went down the capacious throats of these terrible monsters. That wondrous dream when I saw the ante-historical times revivified, when the Tertiary and Quaternary periods passed before me, was now realized. And there we were alone, far down in the bowels of the earth, at the mercy of its ferocious inhabitants. My uncle was full of wonder and astonishment. "Come," he said at last, when his first surprise was over. "Come along, my boy, and let us see them nearer." "No," I replied, restraining his efforts to drag me forward. "We are wholly without arms. What should we do in the midst of that flock of gigantic quadrupeds?" "Come away, uncle, I implore you. No human creature can with impunity brave the ferocious anger of these monsters." No human creature, said my uncle, suddenly lowering his voice to a mysterious whisper. You are mistaken, my dear Henry. Look, look yonder. It seems to me that I behold a human being, a being like ourselves, a man. I looked, shrugged my shoulders decidedly to push incredulity to its very last limits. But whatever my wish, I was compelled to yield to the weight of ocular demonstration. Yes, not more than a quarter of a mile off, leaning against the trunk of an enormous tree, was a human being, a Proteus of these subterranean regions, a new son of Neptune, keeping this innumerable herd of mastodons. Emmanus Pectorius Custus, Emmanuor Ipsi, the keeper of gigantic cattle, himself still more gigantic. Yes, it was no longer a fossil whose corpse we had raised from the ground in the great cemetery, but a giant capable of guiding and driving these prodigious monsters. His height was above 12 feet. His head, as big as the head of a buffalo, was lost in a mane of matted hair. It was indeed a huge mane, like those which belonged to the elephants of the earlier ages of the world. In his hand was a branch of a tree, which served as a crook for this antediluvian shepherd. We remained profoundly still, speechless with surprise. But we might at any moment be seen by him. Nothing remained for us but instant flight. Come, come, I dragging my uncle along, and for the first time he made no resistance to my wishes. A quarter of an hour later, we were far away from the monster. Not that I think of the matter calmly. Now, now that I think of the matter calmly, and that I reflect upon it dispassionately, now that months, years have passed since this strange and unnatural adventure befell us, what am I to think? What am I to believe? No, it is utterly impossible. Our, our ears must have deceived us, and our eyes have cheated us. We have not seen what we believe we have seen. No human being could by any possibility have existed in that subterranean world. No generation of men could inhabit the lower caverns of the globe without taking note of those who peopled the surface, without communication with them. It was folly, 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 nothing else. I am rather inclined to admit the existence of some animal resembling in structure the human race, of some monkey of the first geological epochs, like that discovered by M. Lartet in ossiferous deposits of sand. But this animal or being, whichsoever it was, surpassed in height all things known to modern science. Never mind, however unlikely it may be. It might have been a monkey, but a man, a living man, and with him a whole generation of gigantic animals buried in the entrails of the earth. It was too monstrous to be believed.
Wow. So there's
Yeah.
giants, giant animals, and giant people.
Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my.
I'm sorry about the connection issues, guys. We seem to be having lots of them tonight. There's been some audio
Lots of
issues and
issues.
yeah, some
All
weird
the things.
connections
Well,
to Facebook, but we recorded it, so we'll stick it up and
yep.
y'all will have access to it. But that was an interesting chapter. Um, Hope that you guys enjoyed it.